Awesome. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to night two of Nonprofit Expert Week. I am Tamara W. I am the founder and author of Leading for Good. Tonight, I am joined by the amazing Shanta Johnson, who is our guru tonight for all things bookkeeping. And before we jump in, I just want to intro this by saying the purpose of this week is to really share with nonprofit organizations about topics that I believe are essential for sustainability and topics that are also featured in my upcoming book that releases this Saturday, March 1st, entitled Leading for Good. It is a blueprint for executive directors, and I have a chapter dedicated to financial literacy. So tonight's conversation is right on point. Shanta Johnson is a CPA, licensed certified public accountant in North Carolina with over a decade of experience in accounting and financial management. She is the founder of Shanta Johnson CPA PLLC, a firm dedicated to supporting nonprofit organizations with expert bookkeeping, accounting, and financial advisory services. And I picked Shanta because we actually support a client together. I coach their executive leadership and their board, and she is their amazing bookkeeper. So she was the first person that came to mind. Welcome, Shanta.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. So please hold me accountable if I go out on a tangent about any of the questions you ask.
No worries at all. And I am not a numbers girl, so I fully am glad to have an expert here who can take things over.
Yes.
The first thing I want to ask you is tell us a little bit about yourself. I shared a brief part of your bio, but how did you stumble into the nonprofit space? Because as a CPA, you can really pick any industry, any sector. How did you
Absolutely.
end up in nonprofits?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my career started in corporate accounting was always, straight out of college is what I decided to go into. And then shortly after, I started to recognize there are a lot of people who enjoy what they do. They're passionate about what they do, but they miss the mark because they don't have their financials in place. So when I started my firm initially back in 2017, we were working with any and everybody who just needed that type of support because there's so many people out there. Again, they're really good at what they do, but when it comes to the numbers, it comes to the financials, taxes, whatnot, it was just like over their head. So we worked with for profits and nonprofits, but the more we started working with nonprofits, we started to see like there was a really deep need for I almost want to say like just education on just how finances work, what's the importance of accounting outside of your mission. We want you to be able to go out and do your mission 100%, but also understand the importance of the financials, being able to make decisions, being able to tell your donors, your funders, like how you guys are operating, how your money, how the funds are being spent. And unfortunately, especially nowadays, we're starting to see a lot more where funders are starting to ask more probing questions about your financials before they even or give you the funding that you're requesting. So I say all that to say we saw that there was just a deeper need in the nonprofit arena. And because nonprofit accounting is so much different than what you would do for profit, is one of those areas where we just had to make a decision to just focus in on nonprofits so that we can be able to give proper advice, be up to date on all the changes that are going on, and making sure that we can just honestly be, I would like to say, just another source that people can trust and know that we're just up to date, current, and we can actually support them. So that's how we kind of shifted into nonprofit. We've been doing nonprofit solely, I would say, maybe for about 3 to 4 years now. We do
Okay.
have a few for profit. There are consultants, but they're the consultants that really work with the clients we work with. So it's all in the same umbrella, but we definitely just focus. I would say 98% of our clients is going to be nonprofit organizations.
I love that. And one of the things I want to point out is that you said there's lots of changes that
Lots
happen.
of changes.
And as someone who has been a nonprofit leader, I love when my CPA would email me, hey, this just came out, or this just happened. You need to make sure you do this, or you need to make sure you keep record of this. And I was thinking, That is one main reason why you should absolutely outsource this and outsource it immediately and have somebody that you trust that is qualified in this area.
Hmm.
Because as an executive director, you don't have time to constantly
Um,
track all of this stuff. It's so nice to have somebody who literally does that for a living that is
mhm,
like, I'll keep track of it, but you got to make sure you do the things on your end. I'll stay abreast
absolutely.
of all the laws and all that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up EDs because I know a lot more often than not, especially where organizations are just starting out, the ED wears multiple hats, like hats beyond hats, and just understanding that you really can't do it all, and your expertise is needed in the ED function. So I know sometimes coming out the gate, funding, being able to afford such services, but there are many options that you can explore in terms of just making sure that your foundation is, in place, at least have a decent financial structure was what I would like to say, even when you're starting out in the beginning, before you get to a place where you're getting grants, you're needing to send out reporting, having to answer questions and things of that nature. So I understand, like we work with a lot of EDs who are just, overworked at their wits end, and then they're trying to get funding and they have to send out financials and they have no financials. So
Yes.
we run across that all the time. So I understand exactly what you're saying there.
Continuing down that path, you mentioned donors now, funders are interested in financials,
Oh
and
yeah.
you've met some that don't have them. So, what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen nonprofits make when it comes to their bookkeeping and their financials?
Oh yeah. So sadly, a lot of organizations come to us in cleanup mode, meaning that, like I mentioned, something that's taken place and they need answers, but their QuickBooks, as we work mostly with QuickBooks actually, isn't giving them the information they need. So I would say the first thing that we would say is one of the biggest mistakes is not getting that financial structure in place from the beginning. I think sometimes people find that when they're small that they can just get away with just doing an Excel spreadsheet or just
Yes.
creating their own chart of accounts that makes sense in their head, but not really having a proper nonprofit chart of accounts because that makes a difference when it comes to filing your 990, which we all know having that 990, that's public information. You want to make sure that what you're putting out there to the public is accurate and people can really see how you all are spending your funds. So I would say the very first thing is just not taking the time to get that financial structure in place with setting up QuickBooks properly. We love QuickBooks. QuickBooks works great for nonprofit organizations. The trick is you do have to set it up a certain way in order for it to work for a nonprofit organization. Out the box, QuickBooks is geared for profit businesses. So I say that to say, like, for instance, there are classes that you can use in QuickBooks, there's projects that you can use in QuickBooks. We use a combination of both, sometimes location, depending on the type of organization we work with. And the main reason that we do this is to make sure at any point in time, if you need to pull reporting on a specific grant or just get information out for your just decision making, we can pull those numbers for you with a matter of a few clicks versus it being a fire drill to get that information. So that's like the biggest thing. We spend a
Yeah.
lot of time cleaning up QuickBooks, setting up QuickBooks, which is fun for us. We enjoy it. Most of the time when we do get a client's QuickBooks, we can kind of see what their thought process was, so we can usually get it done in a timely manner so they can get out the information they need. And then the second biggest thing I would say is not reconciling their accounts. I think sometimes
Surprise.
I think sometimes people think because, hey, we coded the transaction or I entered, XYZ in QuickBooks, everything's there. But again, if you're not an expert or you know how to work QuickBooks or not savvy in QuickBooks, it's easy to duplicate things. Like all software and technology, things fail sometimes. So sometimes transactions don't come in. And it's through the reconciliation process that you're able to really go ahead and identify issues ahead of time instead of when it's time to file your taxes and it's all this, questions about money's been spent and where's this revenue? This should have been restricted, tracking those restricted expenditures against the grants. So outside of QuickBooks not being set up, the reconciliations would be number two. And then I would say lastly, not meeting with your, if you have a bookkeeper or accountant or CPA, not having those monthly check-ins. We believe in monthly check-ins. I would say, I don't remember, actually, we don't do it no more. We used to do for like smaller organizations quarterly, but so much change can happen in a small period of time. Having those monthly check-ins is really important.
I love that. And I think one of the things that I point out in that chapter of my book is I say, you don't have to be the mathematician. Like, nobody's asking you to do it, but you
Hmm.
should at least be familiar enough
Yes.
with your reports. You should be having conversations with your bookkeeper. You should be looking at the reports that are coming in. You should be checking to make sure things are reconciled because
Hmm.
you don't want surprises when you go to file that 990 and it's like, okay, your accounts say you should have an extra $15,000
Hmm.
and you don't. Where is it? And then you're having to file extensions and figure out where the money is. So yes, I love that you do those monthly check-ins. Just even if it's a quick things look good, here's where we are, but it's better to be safe than leaving things out there.
Yes, absolutely. And also to kind of go back to that topic as well, even when we've had several clients that we've worked with where they'll have their 990 prepared, and some every tax preparer is different. Some firms specialize in nonprofit accounting, some don't. And I find that it's important to make sure even when your 990 is prepared that you ask probing questions or at least ask the preparer to source it back to your financials. I can't tell you how many times we'll have a 990 and we'll look at their QuickBooks file and it's like two different sets of numbers. It is almost like where their tax returns prepare for a whole different client. So it's just, even when working for a professional, don't be scared to ask questions or ask for clarification. So have them source it back. It happens more often than not where 990s are filed and people have no idea where the numbers are coming from. So that's another important thing. Just make sure you're working with a professional that's going to walk you through your 990. You should be comfortable with it because if someone asks a question, in theory, you should be the one to be able to answer that question.
I love it. And welcome to those of you all that are just joining in for night two of Nonprofit Expert Week. Tonight, I'm joined with Shanta Johnson, who is our certified public accountant based out of North Carolina. And tonight, we're talking about all things keeping your bookkeeping in order and aligned, especially when it comes to the nuances of running a nonprofit. Okay, so Shante, jumping into my next question, we talked a little bit about why it's important to, based on the mistakes that organizations have made. But why do you think accurate bookkeeping matters? And for some of y'all might say, this is a silly question, but it's not. I think there's a lot of reasons, and we've hinted at a few of them, whether it's for funders or filing your
Hmm.
990. But why do you think having that bookkeeping matters for the nonprofit that says, I can keep using that spreadsheet? It's free.
Hmm.
I don't want to pay 800 bucks, $1,000 a month. I would rather just put everything in a spreadsheet and figure it out. Why would you say to them, here is why accurate bookkeeping matters?
It matters because you can only make sound decisions when you have solid information to go off of. Excel will only get you but so far. You will not be able to do a statement of cash flows in Excel, seeing your statement of financial position. You may be able to put together a statement of activity, but in order to make sound decisions, you have to have clear and accurate reporting. And then people who have that stance, I say, imagine your bank account for your personal account. If everything was just in Excel here and there, would you really be able to go in and make decisions or see what's going on in your activity without that detailed level? No. Same with the nonprofit organization, especially too because a lot of times when you have restricted grants, even if it's not restricted. Sometimes if you have, I don't know if we're having a conversation about budgeting, but I love talking about budgeting as well. Even without having restricted grants, if you have a budget in place where you know you want to spend X amount of dollars on a certain area, how are you able to really see how that spend down is looking if you don't have financials in place to record that? So it's good when it's important in order to make again sound decisions for the organization and also be able to share with others how funds are being spent, which is most of the time the questions that people are asking when they do come to a nonprofit organization when they're looking to get funding.
I love that. And I think they said there's an echo on my end when I speak. I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's your headset, Shante. Um,
I don't hear echo.
it may be coming across in the live. Um, Going off of your making sound decisions,
Hmm.
for you, you've mentioned QuickBooks. Are there any tools if someone came to you and said, um, we have been recommended to pick this program or to take this route. What tools or software would you recommend? QuickBooks you've mentioned. Is there anything else?
We love Bill.com. So I know a lot of
I've never heard of them.
Bill.com. Oh, we love Bill.com. So a lot of our clients, they will use for ease or just again to cut expenses. They'll use like bill pay through their bank to like pay bills, or they'll write checks. Well, we've had a few organizations that write checks, or they'll use like QuickBooks has a bill pay feature, but it's not the best. We absolutely love Bill.com for organizations that have issues with receipts. If receipt management is a big area of concern, we love Dex for receipt management. But most of the time, what we do when we come in, we kind of look at your operations on the finance side and see what can we use that you already have in place so that you don't have too many third party tools that you're using to get your financial data. So I'm not big on having a huge tech stack. We try to optimize what you currently have, make it work. But I will say, hands down, QuickBooks Online and Bill.com, we have just about any and all of our clients set up on that combo because it just works beautifully.
And this is new for me because I did not know of Bill.com until today.
Oh, you will love. I mean, if you have, listen, you need to pay vendor, and even if you're receiving payments, it's usually easier to receive payments through Bill.com because a lot of your vendors probably more likely use it. So I love it.
You've given me some tips. I'm now like, let me add that to my tech
Yeah.
stack.
You can't go wrong with Bill.com. That's just, I mean, you really can't. Now, I will say, if you're not tech savvy, it does take a little bit of setup in the beginning. But again, if you can just take your time, and as long as your QuickBooks is set up correct, because it does automatically feed into QuickBooks, which again is why it's important to make sure your QuickBooks file is set up correctly and have all those things in order. But it will feed in very nicely to QuickBooks, so you don't have to worrying about checks that haven't cleared and all those things. This system takes care of it for you.
I love that. Okay. Bill.com, QuickBooks, got it. All right. How often should nonprofit leaders review their statements?
They should review their statements monthly. And that's so every month we have like our month end close process. So we'll close the books, we'll review the GL, we will reconcile the bank accounts, credit cards, loans, anything you may have. We'll reconcile everything and send out the financial reports. And then what the benefit of doing it on a monthly basis again is you don't want it to be 3 or 4 months that something's been done incorrectly, and then you have to go back and fix 4 months of transactions, whether it was expenses that should have been coded against a grant or a whole account that was set up that we missed. It's very important to have that information on a monthly basis, one, to catch issues that may arise, address any changes, and then just overall know where you stand. Things are always changing in the nonprofit world. We know this. Making sure that your cash flow looks good in the event of, who knows what may happen, right? Making sure that you have reserves in place. That's another big thing. Budgeting is like a really big thing as well that
Mhm.
we're working with a lot of our organizations with all the change that's going on. Just making sure we're mindful of cash flow.
I think you make a really good point about budgeting and cash flow because those are
Mm-hmm.
two things that, in my opinion, QuickBooks is fantastic for, and an
Mm-hmm.
Excel spreadsheet is not going to always do for you.
Oh no,
So,
no.
especially when you're dealing with like loss of funding or even an increase in funding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say so. QuickBooks will give you the what I call the down and dirty, right? It will give you the basic. But if you want to, so we have certain tools that we use on the accounting side that allows us to build out more robust cash flow forecasting and budgeting
Okay.
tools. Like you said, if you had a grant in your pipeline for $185,000 and you found out that a grant's going to be $90,000 instead of 185, how do we adjust? How do we pivot? So is these type or individual, contributions. If something happened, another cause is taking precedent in the world, and your funding decreases, how do you pivot? Where's the rest of your funding coming from? So that's why I say this kind of goes back to the original, making sure that your chart of accounts is set up in a way so when you look at your financials in your financial meeting, you can say, oh, well, most of our funding comes from foundations, so we need to make sure that we're nurturing those foundational relationships. Or, hey, our individuals, hey, maybe we should ramp up our email marketing, whatever the case may be. And that's why, again, looking at everything on a monthly basis is really important so you can catch those changes as they happen versus 4 months down the road realizing, that, oh, wow, our foundation grants have dropped off. Who did we lose? Whereas you have the budget in place, I can say, oh, for February, we was expecting a grant from said funder. That grant didn't come through.
Right.
What happened? And we can address that at that point in time instead of when it's time to find the taxes and realize that we didn't get the funding in. So I say monthly. I think the board is just as important. Everyone's board meets differently, but at the bare minimum, I would say at least quarterly when it comes to the board because they should be aware as well. Ideally monthly, but quarterly do well with the board.
Get it in where you can. Get it in where you can.
Exactly.
Do you have any tips around nonprofit transparency and accountability when it comes to finances?
Ooh, that's a good one. I love that one. So I think transparency begins with you guys, with organizations internally doing doing what's necessary to make sure that they can be transparent. And what I mean by that is sometimes you only know what you know. So if, someone, a volunteer or someone is doing bookkeeping, they're doing it to the best of their ability and it's not necessarily accurate, that's all you know, right? So you kind of owe it to the people who are, funding your organization to at least be able to provide them with accurate financial information. Um, Going back to what I said earlier about your 990s, that's public information. All that information should, really outline how the organization is performing, how the funds are being used, all it's a lot of I don't know how many people actually read a Form 990, but there's a lot of good information in a Form 990. So again, going back to that, I think it all starts internally, putting the importance of doing the right things, setting up internal controls. That's another big thing, area of lack I find for organizations is internal controls, and it stems from having people wearing multiple hats. So you, like I said, you have your ED wearing three hats.
Yep.
It's hard to implement internal controls with those things, but it's a necessity. You want to make sure you do right by the money that you've received.
I love that. Okay, if y'all have questions, we are nearing the end, so feel free to drop them so our expert can answer them.
Yes.
Um, on your end, I'll ask Shantae if there's anything you want to add or any like last thoughts that you feel like are important.
Last thoughts. I would say, start before you think you need to start. I think sometimes people feel like they're not in a place that they need to actually hire out, a bookkeeper, a CPA firm. Start those conversations because a lot of times, at least especially with us, we'll work with smaller organizations that's getting started just to go ahead and make sure they at least have their foundation in place. And if we need to, just do some coaching and training, then so be it. We rather you have what you need at its core versus you come to us in the cleanup panic mode. Um, Another thing I would say, QuickBooks is wonderful. I know a lot of people complain about QuickBooks with nonprofits, but it works wonderful. I would say that just make sure that you have the QuickBooks Plus version or higher. That will give you all the tools that are needed to actually make QuickBooks work for a nonprofit organization, which again, the classes and the projects function, sometimes the location as well. And then the other big thing is just making sure that if you're working with a firm that's for prepare your 990, ask them to track it back or source it back to your financial statements. So that way, if someone ever asks you a question, you can comfortably answer because you can tie the two together. I
Love
think
it.
those are my big things. Those are the big things that we see more often than not when people come to us.
Love it. 10 out of 10. And I'll put those resources up for you all. The first is QuickBooks. Shantae said the plus version or higher,
Yes,
and then bill.com.
yes, yes.
All right. I don't see any other questions on my end. I'll give y'all 10 seconds.
Ask away. I love questions.
Well, Shantae, thank you so much for joining me tonight for this conversation. For those of you all that watch, this will be recorded and it will go live it'll stay on YouTube. It'll also be on LinkedIn after this. As a reminder, please make sure to pre order your copy of my book, Leading for Good, that comes out this Saturday. It is a blueprint for executive directors and it covers everything from board engagement to financial literacy to employee support and storytelling for fundraising.
Hmm.
So it is all encompassing. And I hope you all will visit goleadforgood.com and put your order in. We continue these chats, not tomorrow. So we're off tomorrow, but we'll be back on Thursday and I'll have in an expert for grant writing. So I hope you all will return. Again, Shantae, thank you so much
So thank
for joining
you.
me for this conversation. It was great, and I'm sure that so many people received really good information. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, y'all, take care and have a great evening.
Thanks.